My name is Salma, but most people just call me Grandma now. And honestly, I earned that title the hard way. I wasn't always this calm. I wasn't always this quiet either. There was a time when my voice shook, my hands trembled, and my heart believed that love alone was enough to survive this world. Spoiler alert, it's not. Respect matters just as much, sometimes more. I was born way before life got fast, before kids stared into screens instead of faces. Back then, mornings smelled like brewed coffee and fresh laundry, not notifications and stress. We didn't have much money, but we had something people today are starving for: connection. I grew up in a small, tight-knit town where everybody knew your business before you did. If you messed up, trust me, your mama heard about it before you got home. Privacy? Yeah, that wasn't a thing. But let me tell you something, I was a curious kid. Always watching. Always listening. I learned early on that silence can teach you more than noise ever will. While other kids were busy talking, I was busy noticing who kept their word and who folded when things got hard. My father was a quiet man. Not cold, just reserved. He believed in showing up more than showing off. He'd come home tired, hands rough from work, eyes heavy, but he never complained. My mother, on the other hand, she ran the house like a CEO. No nonsense. No excuses. If something needed to be done, it got done, period. From her, I learned something that stuck with me for life. Never beg for space in a house you helped build. At the time, I didn't fully get it. I was just a girl trying to grow up without messing up too bad. But life has a funny way of circling back to the lessons you ignore. School was my escape. Not because I was some straight-A genius, I wasn't, but because it showed me there was a world bigger than my street. Bigger than expectations placed on girls like me. I dreamed quietly. I didn't announce it. I just kept those dreams folded neatly inside my chest. And don't get it twisted, I wasn't weak. I laughed loud, played hard, and if someone underestimated me, I let them. People reveal themselves faster when they think you're harmless. But childhood doesn't last forever. One day you're running barefoot, and the next, life hands you responsibilities you didn't sign up for. Expectations. Rules. Limits. That's when I learned my second big lesson. Love changes when responsibility enters the room. And trust me, responsibility was already knocking. I thought growing up would make life easier. Turns out, it just made the choices heavier. Teenage years hit me like a cold splash of reality. One minute I was still half a kid, the next minute the world expected me to act like I had it all figured out. Newsflash, I didn't. Not even close.
Mom.
That's when I realized
Dad.
something nobody tells you out
Laura
loud.
wants us to live
Growing up
separately.
isn't about age.
My
It's
heart
about
dropped.
pressure. I watched
Robert?
girls my age talk about
He
crushes,
stayed calm.
dances, and weekend plans.
He said,
While I was learning how
if
to
my
stretch a
son's
dollar and
happiness
read the
lives
room,
somewhere else,
I learned when to speak,
then let him
and
go
more
there.
importantly, when not to.
No drama.
Life was already training
No
me to survive
arguments.
conversations that
We
didn't
helped
come
them
with
move out.
instructions. My mother
People
leaned on
praised
me
us.
more during those years.
Such
Not in a
understanding
dramatic
parents.
way, just quietly.
But inside,
A look. Sigh.
a mother's
An
heart was
unspoken,
breaking
I
quietly
need you.
after
And
moving
I
out.
stepped up. Not
Things
because I
changed
wanted
fast.
praise, but because I understood
Laura
loyalty
started calling
early.
Daniel at work.
Family wasn't optional.
She said
It was
this.
the assignment.
She
I still
said that.
remember my first real
Your
heartbreak.
parents insulted
Not
me.
a boy life.
None
the
of it
moment
was
I
true.
understood that dreams don't come true
But lies,
just because you deserve them.
when repeated
You have to
often,
negotiate
start
with
sounding
reality.
real.
Sometimes you
Daniel stopped
compromise.
visiting.
Sometimes you swallow
Stopped
disappointment
calling.
and keep walking like nothing
Months
cracked
passed.
inside you. Did it
Then
hurt?
one day,
Yeah.
Daniel
Did
called.
I complain? No,
Mom,
because I was already
we had a
learning
baby
another
boy.
lesson. Strength
cried.
doesn't announce itself.
happy
It
tears.
shows up quietly and
Our
stays.
grandson.
There were nights I stayed
Noah
awake
Carter.
staring at the ceiling,
Robert held my
thinking about
hands
the
and
future,
whispered,
wondering if I'd
"We're
ever get a
grandparents,
life that felt
Evelyn.
like mine.
We
Wondering
took
if I'd
gifts.
ever be seen, not just
Tiny
needed.
clothes.
And here's the thing,
Soft
I didn't
blankets.
hate responsibility.
We just
I
wanted to
hated
hold
how
our
invisible
grandson.
it made me.
But
People
that day,
thanked me, sure.
our
But nobody
hearts were
asked what
shattered
I
in a way.
wanted. And I didn't know
I
how
can
to
never
ask
forget.
either.
Laura stood
That's
at
how
the door.
patterns start.
She
You get
looked at
praised
us
for
and
being
said,
easy, for being
"You're
understanding,
poor people.
for being low maintenance.
If you touch my son,
And before you know it,
he'll
people
become
expect
poor
you to
too."
shrink without ever saying
I felt
thank you.
dizzy.
But don't get it
Robert
twisted, I
didn't
had
say a
fire
word.
in me. I just
He
kept
held
it
my
controlled.
arm and walked
I
me
learned
away.
how to smile while
In the
memorizing
car,
exits.
he said
How to
softly,
listen while collecting
"Don't
facts.
worry, Evelyn.
How to love without losing
I won't
myself
let anyone
completely.
disrespect you again."
Looking back now, I see it
That
clearly.
night,
Those years
my
didn't
quiet
break me.
husband made a
They
decision.
trained me. Because
That
life
would
doesn't
change our
prepare
lives
you for
forever.
betrayal
You
in
know
one big
something,
moment.
honey.
It builds you up
There's a
slowly,
breaking
piece by
point for
piece,
every
so when the
human
real
being.
test comes, you don't fall
Not
apart.
the loud kind.
You get quiet. And
Not the
trust me,
kind
the
where
real
people
test?
scream or flip
That came
tables.
years later. Wearing a
I'm talking
familiar
about the
face.
silent breaking
Calling me
point.
Mom. I thought I knew
The
what
one where a
sacrifice
man
looked
looks
like.
calm on the outside.
Turns out I hadn't seen anything
But something
yet.
inside him snaps
Adulthood
real
doesn't
clean.
knock. It just walks
That night,
in, drops its
after we came
bags, and
back from
expects you
Daniel's
to deal with
place,
it. By the time I
Robert
was
didn't
old
eat.
enough to make my own
He
decisions,
just sat there,
I had already
staring
spent
at the
years
wall.
making decisions for
I
everyone
asked
else.
him softly.
So when people asked me what I
Robert,
wanted out of
you
life,
okay?
I used to pause.
He nodded.
Not because I was confused,
But I knew him
because
better than
nobody had
anyone.
ever asked me that before.
That wasn't okay.
Marriage came into my life the
That
way
was
most
done
things did
late
back
that
then.
night, while I was
Not
half
as a
asleep.
fairy tale, but as
Robert
a
said something
responsibility
I'll
wrapped
never
in
forget.
tradition. He wasn't a
Evelyn,
bad
he
man.
said quietly.
Let's get that straight. He
I
was
don't care
steady,
about
predictable, and respected by
Never
others.
did.
And in those
Then he
days, that
turned
counted
toward
for
me.
a lot. Did I love him the way movies describe love? No. But I trusted him. And sometimes trust feels safer than passion. I walked into marriage with hope, not illusions. I knew life wouldn't be easy, but I believed teamwork could make it manageable. What I didn't know was how often women are expected to bend while calling it compromise. The early years were fine. That's the word people use when they don't want to complain but don't want to lie either. I learned quickly how to manage moods, smooth tension, and keep the peace. Not because I was afraid, but because chaos wastes energy. I became good at reading between the lines, at knowing when to push and when to stay quiet. People called me patient. I called it strategic. And then I became a mother. Nothing, and I mean nothing, rewires your soul like holding your child for the first time. Suddenly, your life is no longer just yours. Every fear gets louder. Every instinct sharpens. I promised myself right there that my child would never feel invisible the way I once did. I poured myself into motherhood. Time, love, sacrifice, the whole package. I taught manners, values, respect. I showed up to everything I could. I built a home that felt safe, warm, predictable. But here's what no one warns you about. When you give too much without boundaries, people start thinking it's unlimited. I didn't see the signs at first. Why would I? I was busy being reliable, being the glue, being the one who handles it. And while I was building a life for my family, I slowly stopped building one for myself. Years passed like that, quietly, productively, respectfully. And somewhere along the way, I taught my son how to stand strong in the world. What I didn't realize was, I also taught him what it looks like when a woman makes herself small. I raised my son to be confident. I just didn't realize who he'd learned that confidence from. Motherhood didn't drain me. In a strange way, it gave me purpose, structure, a reason to keep going even on days when I felt like disappearing into silence. My son grew fast. Too fast. One day he was holding my finger, the next he was questioning the world. I watched him absorb everything, my tone, my reactions, my silences. Kids learn more from what you tolerate than what you preach. And I tolerated a lot. I made sure he never lacked the basics. Food on the table. Clean clothes. A home that felt steady even when life outside wasn't. I showed him respect by example, how to speak, how to listen, how to carry yourself with dignity. But somewhere along the way, appreciation slowly turned into expectation. First it was small. He assumed I'd be there. That I'd handle things. That I'd adjust. And I did, because that's what mothers do, right? Except here's the part nobody likes to say out loud. When you're always available, people stop valuing your presence. I didn't feel unloved. That would have been easier to process. What I felt was overlooked. Like a piece of furniture everyone relies on but nobody notices unless it's gone. And I told myself it was normal. That this was the price of being a good mother. I convinced myself that love would circle back eventually. Years went by. My husband stayed distant but stable. Not cruel. Not warm. Just there. I learned not to expect emotional rescue from him. I built my strength internally instead. I started noticing changes in my son during his teenage years. Confidence turning into certainty. Certainty turning into authority. He wasn't disrespectful, at least not openly, but there was a tone that hadn't been there before. A subtle sense of ownership. At the time I blamed society. Peer influence. Growing independence. I didn't want to believe it could be something closer to home. But looking back now I see it clearly. He didn't mean harm. He just never learned where my limits were. Because I never showed them. I thought love meant staying. I didn't realize love also meant knowing when not to shrink. When my son finally left home, People congratulated me like I'd completed some kind of mission. You did a great job, they said. He's independent now. You must be so proud. And I was. Truly. But pride doesn't cancel loneliness, it just makes it quieter. The house felt different after he left. Not empty, just still. I rearranged furniture, picked up new routines, told myself this was the chapter where I finally focused on me. Funny thing is, that chapter never really started. My son came back often. Not because he needed me, because it was convenient. Laundry, meals, a place that felt safe without any emotional maintenance. And I let it happen. Old habits die hard. Then he got married. Now listen carefully, I didn't hate my daughter-in-law. That's the narrative people love, but it's lazy. She was polite, organized, opinionated, and very clear about how she wanted her life to run. That's when the balance shifted. Conversations started happening without me. Decisions were made around me, not with me. My role quietly downgraded from mother to background support. I noticed it, but I stayed silent. Not because I was afraid, because I was observing. I saw how space became currency, how tone replaced respect, how we started meaning them, and how I became negotiable. Still, I didn't panic. Life had taught me patience, timing, restraint. Because here's the truth most people don't get. I never feared being alone. I feared being tolerated. And one day, much later, my son would sit across from me, calm as ever, and say words that would split something open inside me. Words that would change everything. I thought I had seen disappointment before. I had no idea what was coming next. There are moments in life when nothing explodes. No shouting, no drama, no slammed doors. But something still breaks. That day started like any other. Coffee was already cold by the time my son sat across from me. He looked tired, focused, like someone who had rehearsed a conversation in his head a dozen times and finally decided today was the day to deliver it. I noticed his posture first. Straight, firm, not angry, just resolved. That's when I knew. People think bad news always comes with warning signs. Raised voices, shaking hands, tears. But the worst news? It comes calm. Mom, he said, clearing his throat. We need to talk. I nodded, took a sip of my coffee, stayed quiet. Then he said it. It's time you moved out. No pause. No apology. No softness. Just a sentence. Delivered like a business decision. For a second, I honestly thought I misheard him. Not because the words were unclear, but because they felt misplaced. Like they belonged to a different family. A different story. I waited for him to explain. To soften it. To add context. He didn't. Instead, he leaned back, arms crossed, already preparing his reasons. We need our space. It's better this way. You'll be more comfortable on your own. Comfortable. That word almost made me laugh. Because comfort wasn't what he was offering. He was offering removal, wrapped in polite language. I looked at his face. The same face I once stayed up all night for. The same hands I taught to hold a spoon, then a pen, then confidence. And in that moment I realized something that hit harder than the words themselves. He wasn't asking. He was informing me. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't remind him of sacrifices or sleepless nights. I just nodded. Okay, I said. And that single word confused him more than anger ever could. He thought my silence meant surrender. He had no idea what silence was buying me. After he said it, it's time you moved out. There was this strange pause. Not awkward. Not emotional. Just transactional. Like the deal had been placed on the table, and all that was left was my signature. That's when she walked in. My daughter-in-law didn't interrupt. She never did. She simply joined the room, sat down beside him, and folded her hands like this was a meeting she'd already approved. She smiled at me. Soft. Practiced. I hope you understand, she said. This isn't personal. That line? That's how you know it's personal. I looked at both of them. A united front. Calm. Reasonable. Very modern about it. No yelling, no disrespect on the surface. Just boundaries being drawn where none had existed before. They talked about logistics. Timelines. Options. You could stay with a friend. There are senior apartments not too far from here. We'll help you settle. Help. Another funny word. Help usually comes before decisions are made, not after. I listened. Truly. I asked a couple of questions. Neutral ones. The kind that don't reveal what you're thinking. I watched how they answered, how confident they were, how relieved. That's when it clicked. This conversation wasn't about space. It was about control. They had already reorganized their lives, and I didn't fit the new layout. And here's the part that surprised even me. I didn't feel anger right away. What I felt was clarity. Because when someone finally tells you where you stand, you stop guessing. You stop hoping. You stop bending. I excused myself politely and went to my room, closed the door, sat on the bed. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't ask myself, what did I do wrong? I asked myself something better. What do I actually own in this situation? Not emotionally, not morally, legally. That question changed everything. They thought they were giving me a deadline. What they really gave me was a reminder. I didn't pack that night. I didn't cry into pillows or call anyone to complain. I did something much more dangerous. I remembered. I lay on that bed staring at the ceiling, letting memories line up the way facts do when they're finally ready to tell the truth. That house, they talked about it like it belonged to them, like I was just a long-term guest who overstayed her welcome. But I knew better, because I remembered the paperwork, the signatures, the conversations nobody else paid attention to. Years ago, when my son was still young and money was tight, that house wasn't a dream, it was a risk. Banks don't hand out trust. They demand proof, stability, backup. I was the backup. My credit, my savings, my name. I remembered sitting at that desk, pen in hand, listening to the agent explain things slowly, like I might not understand. I understood perfectly. I asked questions, clarified clauses, made sure my name was where it mattered. Not because I planned revenge, because I planned security. Back then, everyone called it being cautious. Now, felt like foresight. The next morning, I woke up lighter, not relieved, focused. I made breakfast like usual, smiled like usual, thanked them for the coffee. They mistook my calm for acceptance. That's the thing about underestimating women who've lived quietly for decades. You forget how much they've seen. I pulled out an old folder later that afternoon. The kind people ignore because it doesn't look urgent. Inside were copies, deeds, agreements, proof. I traced my name with my finger. Still there. Still valid. Still powerful. And in that moment I didn't feel petty. I didn't feel angry. I felt grounded. Because suddenly I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. They thought I was figuring out where to go. I was figuring out what to do. I didn't call him. I didn't call anyone in the house. I didn't want confrontation. Drama is loud, it's obvious. This wasn't going to be loud. Not now, not ever. I picked up my phone. Not shaking, not anxious. Calm. Precise. Like every word I would speak had been rehearsed for decades without ever being spoken. The person on the other line didn't even realize the significance of my call. Hello, I said, sweet as syrup, almost like the world had no idea who I really was. And then I made my move. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't emotional. It was legal, direct, and clean. I asked the right questions, confirmed the details, signed where I needed to sign. It was done before the house even woke up that morning. By the time my son got out of bed and brewed his first coffee, everything had changed. Nothing looked different. The floors were still clean, the walls still beige, the sun still spilling through the windows. Except the ownership had shifted. The house that had always been ours was now decidedly mine. I didn't gloat. I didn't drop hints. I didn't leave notes. I didn't have to. They would find out soon enough. And the best part? They wouldn't see it coming. Because here's the beauty of power. It's quiet. It's unassuming. And it hits hardest when people least expect it. I spent the day as if nothing had changed. Cooked, cleaned, smiled, helped my grandson with homework, made small talk, played the part of the sweet, compliant grandma. Meanwhile, the seed of realization had already been planted. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was justice. They thought I was leaving. I had already decided the truth. They just didn't know it yet. The morning started like any other. Sunlight spilling over the kitchen counters. Coffee brewing. Birds doing their morning thing. I walked down the stairs humming softly, carrying the same calm air I always did. He didn't notice anything. Not the phone calls from the agent that had finalized the sale. Not the emails confirming ownership transfers. Not the legal papers quietly filed the day before. He sat at the table, sipped his coffee, and glanced at me with that familiar expression. Confident, in control, thinking he still ran the world he had built around himself. I smiled. Not smug. Just calm. And then came the first call he wasn't expecting. The agent. "Good morning, Mr. Sun's name. I'm calling to confirm that the house has been officially sold, and the keys have been handed over to the new owners. Congratulations." The silence on the other end was enough to fill the room. I watched him. Eyes wide. Mouth slightly open. The kind of disbelief only comes from realizing you weren't part of the plan you thought you controlled. "Wait, what?" he stammered. I just sipped my coffee. Slowly. I let the pause stretch. Let him fumble. Let the moment sink in. What do you mean?" he said again, louder this time. Anger starting to creep in. "Good morning, dear," I said, still calm. "I just wanted to let you know that everything is taken care of. Isn't it nice when things run smoothly?" He looked at me as if I had grown a second head. His hands shook slightly. Not because I yelled. Not because I threatened him. But because reality had quietly, irrevocably shifted under his feet. This can't be, you can't," he started. I raised a finger. Not aggressively. Not to be dramatic. Simply to interrupt the chaos he expected. Calm down. There's nothing to panic over. The papers are signed. The sale is final. Everything is legal. Everything is clean. Everything is done. I let him sit there. Let him absorb it. The humiliation. The disbelief. The sudden understanding that life had rules he hadn't accounted for. Rules I had quietly mastered long ago. And then I added softly, "Next time, remember, quiet people are often the ones you least understand. They're the ones who can wait. Observe. And when the time comes, act." It was a lesson he would never forget. And for me, the quiet satisfaction of justice delivered without anger was far sweeter than any confrontation could have been. They thought the house defined our lives. They had no idea I defined my own. The house was gone. Not in the way you imagine, walls demolished or furniture hauled away, but in the way that reality hits you when people finally realize they underestimated someone. My son was speechless for hours. He wandered through rooms he'd grown up in. Rooms that suddenly felt foreign to him. He touched the counters, the windows, the floors, and realized that the life he thought was his to control had quietly slipped out of his hands. I stayed calm, polite, almost invisible in the chaos he had created by assuming I would always bend. You sold the house?" he asked finally. His voice was shaky, incredulous. "Yes," I replied softly. "I did." Shock froze him mid-step. The anger he'd been building up for months, maybe years, had no outlet. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was real, quiet, and devastating. He turned to his wife, hoping she might salvage some ground. But she too could only stare at me. The reality? She had underestimated me just as much. I watched them scramble. I smiled slightly, not out of glee, but because the lesson was being delivered in the most powerful way. Naturally, silently, effectively. Sometimes people think revenge has to be loud. Threats. Screaming. Tears. But the truth? The quietest, most calculated actions are the ones that hit hardest. I made breakfast that morning. Sat at the table. Sipped my coffee. Nothing had changed except everything had. They thought life could push me around. They didn't realize I've been shaping my life long before they knew the rules. By the afternoon, the house was technically theirs no longer. But the weight of reality had settled in. You could see it in their faces. My son paced the living room, muttering under his breath. He tried to regain control as if shouting or bargaining could rewind time. But this wasn't about negotiation anymore. His wife hovered nearby, polite on the surface but tense in every movement. Every smile was brittle, every word measured. She glanced at me often, perhaps realizing for the first time that the quiet woman in the corner had been far more powerful than either of them ever imagined. You can't just do this. He finally blurted, frustration bleeding through his calm veneer. I tilted my head, meeting his gaze. Calm, steady. Oh, I could. And I did. There was no anger in my voice. No trembling. Nothing dramatic. Just the truth. And sometimes that is far heavier than screams or tears. I could see the panic building in him. Not the fear of losing the house, it was too late for that, but the fear of realizing he had miscalculated me. For years he had assumed I would bend, I would smile, I would quietly accept. And now? Break time equals 500 ms. //